south of San Francisco. But the information beyond the basics, Ken, has been fairly slow to come in. How well equipped, both mentally and physically, are the fire department and the police department for this eventuality?
I think they were as well equipped as they could be. They go through drills every year, earthquake drills, and that's the primary practice. That is to train firefighters and the police departments in handling something like this. And I might point out, as we looked at that fire, that's what officials fear the most: the fires. As you may remember, in 1906, when the big earthquake hit San Francisco,
8.3 on the Richter scale, it was, right?
That's what destroyed the city. The fires.
The fire. And now, of course, it's even enhanced to some extent by the fact that there are gas mains all over the city, and you start gas fires, which are extremely difficult to fight.
San Francisco, though, was, I'd say, fairly well prepared in the sense that buildings over the last number of years have been built to withstand strong earthquakes, and I think that's probably why you don't see even more damage than we're hearing about.
You have very, very tough city restrictions.
We do. And the newer buildings are certainly built to withstand stronger earthquakes than the one that hit today.
What's the regulation? What does the city require or the state require that you be prepared to deal with? Well, just to remind people, the 6.5, there was no Richter scale in 1906. 6.5 on the Richter scale is classified as a quake which can do very severe damage. Not quite sure what's going on here.
All right, Peter, I'll tell you what. Let me take it back from you for a moment. Please. And you and I are sitting. Parenthetically, you're sitting in New York, I'm sitting in Washington. Fortunately for us, if not for him, Al Michaels is still sitting in San Francisco. Al, where physically are you at Candlestick right now?
Right now, Ted, we are in our production truck, which is just outside the ballpark, clear of the overhang. And I think that's very important, too. One of the things that you're trained to do as a Californian is to make sure there is nothing above you. I know when I am at home and I feel that an earthquake is in progress, I will normally go outside as quickly as I possibly can and get away from anything that might fall on top of you. And again, I mentioned, the one thing that I think I'd like to point out here too, Ted, is that when word began to circulate at the ballpark that the magnitude of this earthquake was in the 6 to 6.9 range, I knew immediately that the epicenter had to be 50, 75, maybe 100 miles from the ballpark. I was remarking about that to Tim McCarver as we were sitting through some of the aftershocks, because I know when I lived in this region, in the city of Menlo Park, one morning I was awakened by what I felt was the big one, as we've all come to expect in California, only to find out that the magnitude of the quake was 3.1, and then to find out the epicenter was a half a mile from my house. So obviously the key is to be as far away from the epicenter as possible to be able to avoid any damage. And all I can say, Ted, is thank God the epicenter was far enough away from Candlestick Park so that this structure remained erect.
Yeah, well, of course, that doesn't do a lot, though, for the folks of Santa Cruz. This took place, the epicenter was just 10 miles north of Santa Cruz. Let me just debrief you for a moment, Al, in terms of your expertise as a Californian on earthquakes. 10 miles away, 6.5 to 7 on the Richter scale. Can we infer anything of what is likely to have happened in Santa Cruz tonight?
Obviously, there has to be major damage. Again, Santa Cruz is it's not really a metropolitan area. It's a lovely little community, and there are other communities that wind their way up through Highway 17 towards San Jose. And then if you would proceed south from Santa Cruz down Highway 1, you'd eventually come to Monterey. So I would suspect, this earthquake was obviously felt all over what is known as the Bay Area, also the South Bay as well. And, it's an ironic thing that San Jose is now the biggest city in the Bay Area. So there were certainly after effects of what took place in the city of San Jose and places like Gilroy and all the way down the coast toward perhaps San Luis Obispo.
Al, let's just briefly recapitulate for those members of our audience who may have joined us within the past few minutes. Obviously, the third game of the World Series has been canceled. The Commissioner of Baseball, Fay Vincent, said he will make a decision sometime tomorrow as to whether or not that third game can be played at Candlestick Park. We are looking live now at, is that a shot from the blimp, Al, or is that a helicopter shot?
If you are seeing what I am seeing, that's from the blimp. Are you seeing the Bay Bridge right now,
That's
Ted?
exactly right. That's
yes,
a blimp shot?
Right, that's a blimp shot from the cantilevered, again, that's the cantilevered portion of the Bay Bridge, the top half of which has collapsed onto the bottom half. Again, that's the top half carries traffic from Oakland into San Francisco. and the bottom half from San Francisco back the other way toward the East Bay.
All right, as you can probably see now, Al, we are looking at videotape that was shot earlier. The reason we're going to that tape, as you will see in just a second, is that you will see very clearly that 30 to 50 foot segment of the upper level of the bridge, which has collapsed onto the lower level of the bridge. And if it's the piece of videotape that I expect to see, we'll be moving in even closer on that shot, and you will see that there are at least a couple of vehicles that were trapped down there. Hundreds of cars on that lower level. Obviously, they're going nowhere right now unless the police turn them around and get them off the bridge, which I assume they will have done in the past hour and a half since this occurred. There's that vehicle that I was talking about a moment ago. San Francisco Airport has been closed down. That huge fire, and I hope that we will be getting a little more information on where that fire is and whether the fire department thinks they're going to get it under control, is just one of several fires blazing not only in San Francisco but also in Oakland and in Berkeley, although there is information that Hal Bruno, our political director, who, as I said earlier, is himself a member of a volunteer fire department. He has been talking to friends and colleagues of his at the Los Angeles Fire Department. They've been monitoring communications with San Francisco, and while Hal reports that there are several fires, all of them are being brought under control. All of them, I would assume, except that one that we have been looking at, which for one reason or another they may be allowing to burn itself out. There have been large segments of highway that have buckled. We have not even preliminary reports right now on any injuries that may have occurred either on the Bay Bridge or on those highways or elsewhere. Al, out at Candlestick, amazingly and thankfully, I think you can report nobody hurt?
As far as I can tell, Ted, no. Everybody, it was an odd reaction at first. We all knew what it was. And yet most of the people remained, and in fact there was a little bit of black humor as well. 15 or 20 minutes later, despite a couple of soft aftershocks, there was a chant of play ball, which quickly dissipated. And then they had no communication here with the crowd. All of the power was gone, so you had no PA system in effect. And then finally a couple of, I take it, security people or officers came out onto the field and with bullhorns announced that people were to evacuate the stadium. But everything, Ted, was extremely orderly. There was no panic. It was more of a sense of wonderment than anything else. And again, it really took a little while for it to sink in. People were sort of wryly laughing or making jokes a few minutes after the quake, and then as we walked out maybe 20 to 25 minutes after the quake hit at 5:04, there were some stricken looks on the faces of people at that point as the reality of what might have happened set in.
Al, while you were talking there, I was just being told in my ear that we have a reaction to what is going on right now from both the President, President Bush, and from his Chief of Staff, John Sununu.
John called the governor's office and got some information there. The governor's out of the country, but we're beginning to get a lot of information in here, and obviously the federal government will do everything that possibly can to help, but at this point we're just assessing.
Here, sir, just overall that extent of damage.
You've got the latest report.
Just the governor's office said they had some information on some scattered fires. No confirmation exactly what the specific damage to the bridge was, although there is some damage that has warranted the closing of the bridge. There seems to be power out at the airport in some of the major components of the airport. So the airport is either operating at a very low level or shut down. It may be shut down.
You may want this delayed. They just handed me a report if you want to take a look at that. Well, I don't know about tonight, but the team will be operating, working here to see how we can assist.
Nothing different than what I've just said.
All right, that was President Bush, of course, and White House Chief of Staff Sununu. Here we have one of these curious situations, Al Michaels, that I know you're familiar with. In an instance like this, where quite literally sometimes the government is getting its information of what's happening from us, we're watching on television and trying to hear from them what's going on. This is one of those instances where I think we're a little bit ahead of what the White House has, because indeed the airport at San Francisco has been closed down. The bridge, the damage that the president was referring to, is damage that you at home have been seeing and we have been reporting on now for the better part of an hour and a half. And indeed, the only information we are not able to bring you at this point, because obviously all the emergency personnel in San Francisco are dealing with the crisis at the moment, and we are not yet getting very good reporting on what, if any, casualties there have been. And once again, Al, do you recognize that segment of San Francisco? That is a fairly enormous fire which seems to have consumed at least a block.
Yes, Ted. As a matter of fact, as we have zoomed in here, assuming you're seeing the same thing I am seeing, we would be looking west, and as we pull back now, you will see eventually the Golden Gate Bridge, which spans San Francisco and Marin County. That is, as I say, in the Marina Pacific Heights area. It's a few blocks from Fisherman's Wharf. In fact, as you can see there, it's about 2 or 3 blocks from the marina, with Fisherman's Wharf more toward the foreground at this particular point. I would say, I know the city fairly well. I can't tell you exactly what is being consumed right there, but generally that is a residential area with some small stores scattered here and there, maybe a mom and pop type convenience store or whatever, but obviously the entire block or more than that is being consumed right now. And what appears to be, very fortunately, the only major fire that we're able to see from our blimp and helicopter coverage from San Francisco.
Yeah, it's the only one we can see, but I must tell you, Al, apparently it is not the only one that is blazing right now. We have reports of a major fire in an area near the library at the University of California in Berkeley, and the Associated Press is reporting now that it has an unconfirmed report of a shopping mall that has collapsed in San Jose. Now, San Jose is how many miles to the south of San Francisco?
San Jose would be roughly 45 miles to the south, and as we mentioned before, Ted, San Jose would be far closer to the epicenter than San Francisco. The epicenter is near Santa Cruz. You can drive from Santa Cruz to San Jose in, probably 25 to 30 minutes time. We mentioned before, it's a huge area. In fact, it's more of the geographical and population center of the Bay Area than San Francisco. It's a part of Silicon Valley. It's been tremendously developed, and the population has doubled and tripled in recent years. And as I suspected before, without having firsthand knowledge, no doubt they felt the earthquake to a far larger extent in San Jose than the people did in San Francisco.
All right. Al, there's just been a note handed me that fire we've been looking at, we're still looking at the fire, although I think we have a freeze frame right now of the fire, is at a corner of Beach and Divisadero Streets, 1.5 blocks from the Palace of Fine Arts. There have been some deaths reported in Hollister, and Al, once again, I come to you as my California expert. Do you know where Hollister is?
Yes, Hollister would be roughly 30 miles south-southeast of San Jose. It would be, I would estimate, in the vicinity of 80 miles from San Francisco, almost due south, and certainly much closer to the epicenter of this quake. If the epicenter is indeed in Santa Cruz, it would be much closer to the epicenter than the city of San Francisco.
Now, just a parenthetical note, the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, there is a report that they are on a level 4 alert, which is actually their lowest level. Let me emphasize, there is absolutely no indication of any damage at the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, but that too is at least within reach here. How far away is that from the epicenter? Or, let's make it from San Francisco. Do you happen to know, Al?
It would be difficult for me to figure that one out at this point.
All right, we'll find someone who knows, and as soon as I know, I'll be glad to report it to everybody else. But again, just to sort of recapitulate, as a matter of fact, take us back for a moment, Al, to what happened earlier this evening at the park, at Candlestick, and sort of describe to us. I heard you while you were on the air, and in fact, I just sort of picked up. I was having a sandwich, and I was just about to tune in and listen and watch the beginning of the World Series, and I heard you talk about this historic, unprecedented event, and quite frankly, I didn't know what you were talking about. But well, fill us in, will you?
At that point, Ted, I'm not sure I knew what I was talking about, because all I was thinking about, frankly, at that point was survival. I mean, the interesting thing is, as you well know in television, one of the things that you do when you go on the air is you want to come on very, very cleanly, and and those of us in news and sports, and Tim McCarver and Jim Palmer and I in the booth, are working in a very intense state of concentration at that particular moment. And if somebody were to pinch you, you would probably jump 6 feet. And all of a sudden, in the middle of all of this, where you're thinking very hard about where you're leading in regard to tape and all of that and taking commands from the truck, there was this roll. And I'm not sure that Tim, who lives in Philadelphia, necessarily knew what it was. In fact, he did feel that that the crowd was stopping for whatever reason. I knew as a Californian that it was an earthquake. In fact, Tim McCarver is in the truck right now, and let's get a non-Californian's response from Tim as to what he felt.
Hello, Ted.
Hello, how are you, Tim?
I'm fine, thank you. My first reaction was one of the upper deck, the deck above us. I was in Chicago in 1984.
Go ahead, Tim.
As you see, the traffic backed up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Well, if ever there was cause for a traffic jam, San Francisco certainly has it tonight. Again, there's been an earthquake with a reading of 6.5 to 6.9 on the Richter scale, and that traffic, would that be traffic that has come from the Candlestick Park area and is trying to get back into San Francisco? Tim, do you know? I don't know why I'm asking a Philadelphian.
Ted, I had a feeling that you were going to ask something about it. Ask that question again, and maybe I can help you here. That traffic there?
Yeah, I was wondering whether that would be...
No, that's not a freeway. That is an east-west artery near Fisherman's Wharf. It would not be near the freeway system, in fact. That's local traffic, or that's spectator traffic, or whatever. Again, that's an east-west artery in the city of San Francisco. You're looking at there. There would normally, Ted, be a lot of traffic in this city anyway at 6:43 local time, so that particular shot is not that unusual. I'm sure there are those who are out gawking and spectating and maybe adding a little bit more to it, but maybe 10 to 15%. It's a very heavily traveled, obviously, time of day, as it is in most major American cities. But to reiterate, Ted, in terms of the traffic problems in this area, I can't begin to tell you what the magnitude of those problems will be with the collapse of a section of the Bay Bridge, because in the best of times, Al, it's difficult to get around.
Let me interrupt you just for one moment, because we have a taped report from our affiliate KGO on the collapse of that Bay Bridge, and I understand there has been at least one fatality. Let's take a look at that report right now.
Severed. You're seeing a car that attempted to drive over this 50-foot gap in the Bay Bridge. It has been like a drama here. It has been dangling from the edge, the precipice behind me, and these folks are just getting rescued right now. It's been about an hour-long effort. It's been a frightening scene here. As you can see, just below me is where this crack in the Bay Bridge occurred, a 50-foot section. You see down there below the two cars that were on the upper deck when the bridge collapsed. They fell below. We understand that the people in both of those cars did get out safely.
All right, so there you have a report from Leslie Brinkley. I apologize to you because I was under the impression that there was some word of what the casualties might have been. We did see someone being attended to there behind Leslie. I don't know what condition that person was in. We do have a ham radio report now that says there is severe damage in the areas of San Jose and Hollister, California, both of which, as Al Michaels told you, are some miles south of San Francisco, and therefore that much closer to the epicenter. Standing by right now, I'm sorry I did not get the name, Sydney Kohara.
Right.
Sydney, if you can bring us up to date on what is happening, whatever new information you can give us, we'd be very grateful for. Go ahead, Sydney.
What we are finding out now is that we are having a pretty terrible problem with some fires in the Bay Area. One, especially right now, that is raging, is in an area known as the Marina District, which is very close to the Golden Gate Bridge. It's an older district. It's more on the flat level, probably about, most of the buildings are probably 4 or 5 stories high. We have a terrible fire there that I remember looking out my window when the earthquake hit, saw some smoke. The building apparently has collapsed, and they are looking for people now, if in fact they can get that close, because the latest pictures that we had looked like there was no way, if someone someone was in the building that they could have gotten out.
Yeah, Sydney, I don't know if you have access to a monitor and whether you're getting the network feed on that monitor, but in point of fact, we've been getting aerial shots from the Goodyear blimp and are looking at it right now. Perhaps you'd be good enough to describe precisely where that area is for non-Californians and also what kind of a neighborhood it is, because we can see you know, just what kind of a fire it is. It really is a raging inferno right now.
Right. If you are aware of where the Golden Gate Bridge is as it leads into Marin County, just to the right of the bridge, you have an area that is known as the Marina District. That is where it is. It is just south of the bay before you go under the Golden Gate Bridge. So it is. It's a very beautiful area. It is just a little bit southwest of Fisherman's Wharf. It's a little bit north of Pacific Heights, and like I said, it's a very beautiful area near Lombard Street, very, very picturesque, and it's really, I think it's amazing for me, not having lived in the city that long and been in California for about 5 years, to think that that would be the area that would go down first. There are many, many tall buildings in this area, and that's where it looks like probably about a 4 or 5 story apartment building. That area is very congested. There are a lot of people that live in a small area, so I think that we're very worried here looking at that particular fire, because when the earthquake first hit, no one really knew. We didn't really think about telling people as far as to cut off their gas, and as soon as we realized to tell them to cut off their gas, perhaps in this particular situation, it was a little too late.
Well, I think you've put your finger on precisely the point, because it's been suggested to me that what causes fires like that in the event of an earthquake is precisely a ruptured gas main. Now, it may well be that even if people had turned off the gas in their homes, when a main ruptures, and if you have any kind of sparks caused by the friction of the earthquake itself, there is nothing that could prevent that fire from beginning. But what reports do you have, Sydney, if you could just bring us up to date? I've been saying now for the past half hour or so that we do not yet have any kinds of casualty reports. We don't know if anyone's been killed. We don't know if anyone's been injured.
Right.
Can you bring me up to speed on that?
Ted, what we're finding out at this particular point, I just talked to CHP about 10 minutes ago. And
California Highway Patrol?
Right, the California Highway Patrol. The problem they are having is the problem that I think all the Office of Emergency Services, all the people in San Francisco are having. The phone lines are down. The California Highway Patrol is trying to get out to all of their offices to try to get reports on what is happening in the particular districts. And they're having a very, very difficult time. I managed to get through, and at this particular time, they're trying to just get their forces together and try to survey the particular districts and the particular areas within the Bay and the East Bay. What they could tell me is that they are mobilizing forces. They are bringing in their helicopter and some other pieces of equipment from Sacramento, from the capital. They are also mobilizing forces from different parts of the state, getting them into the Bay Area and getting ready to disperse them if there's going to be a need. And at this particular time, I think once they finally get the phone lines in, you're going to see a lot of need.
All right, let me quickly tap whatever local expertise you have there, because I'm hearing that the worst damage, or severe damage at least, has taken place in San Jose and in Hollister. How far from San Francisco? What kind of population centers are we talking about?
Okay. We are looking at San Jose and Hollister. We're looking at, from what I understand, the epicenter was about 50 miles southeast. That is the preliminary report that I'm getting. Let's see, I'm looking at here, 10 miles northeast of Santa Cruz, 10 miles south of San Jose. They're looking at major damage in those areas, but we haven't gotten any, we don't have any specific reports. The preliminary report that we do have from the Berkeley Seismology Center, the preliminary estimates are showing that it registered a 6.5. And I don't really know of any instances of severe damage in that area, but since we are located in the San Francisco area, we're very aware of what is happening here. We've got reporters on the scene in different areas in the Oakland area, and we've got a Bay Bureau, which I don't think we've heard from yet, but we're hoping to hear from them any minute now.
All right, Sydney, thank you very much. Standing by now is Bob Olson of the Seismic Safety Commission. Mr. Olson, what can you tell us about the earthquake itself?
Thank you very
very much. I would say that we've got a borderline regional catastrophe here. I'm very concerned about what you just mentioned, the areas that we're not hearing from. And that's the epicentral area, the San Jose, which is a very large metropolitan area, the Monterey Peninsula, the Hollister area, where the San Andreas, Hayward, and Calaveras faults all come together. Plus, what's coming in here now is we're getting glimpses of widespread damage near the fire. We're seeing some collapsed buildings. There have been other shots of collapsed elevated freeways in San Francisco. And I'm very worried, given the time of day that this took place, about casualties in cars that may have been caught in those particular structures.
Mr. Olson, forgive my ignorance, but what does your organization do?
Well, I was the first director of the California Seismic Safety Commission, and now I'm a private consultant specializing in earthquake and natural hazards mitigation.
What is it we should be looking for now? We are looking, I mean, as you and I are speaking together right now, and I hope our viewers don't get the wrong impression. San Francisco is not totally on fire. Sometimes it looks that way when we get too much of a close-up there, but we are looking at one particular square block area of San Francisco that is in very, very bad shape. And indeed, there are some other fires in Berkeley and in Oakland. And Bob Olson, I don't know if you can still hear me. I guess we've just lost that line, and that's not too surprising. We're having trouble with telephone lines all over the region. What Bob Olson, who used to be the commissioner of the Seismic Safety Commission, was telling us is that perhaps the most alarming information of the night is not the information that we have, but the information that we do not have from areas like San Jose and Santa Cruz and Hollister. These are areas about 40, 50, 60 miles south of San Francisco, and therefore on the San Andreas Fault, right on the epicenter of this earthquake, which is registered between 6.5 and 6.9 on the Richter scale. No information at the moment from those areas, which could be, and I don't want to alarm people who have families in those areas, but that could be a sign that maybe the worst that has happened there is simply that the telephone system is out. But that is the area that we are most concerned about at the moment, although, as you can see, there is considerable damage in and around San Francisco. Standing by at the White House now is our White House correspondent, my colleague Britt Hume. What's the president doing, and what is the federal government doing or going to do, Britt?
Well, the president, to the extent that he could, has put the federal government in action tonight. He is retired to the family quarters here at the White House. Governor Sununu, his chief of staff, is monitoring the situation. He has called over one of the heads of the Federal Emergency Management Agency who came here and reported. Robert Morris is his name, and he said that the earthquake was a 6.9. That puts it at the highest of the range that we've been told, and that the epicenter was indeed 60 miles southeast of San Francisco. Morris has now returned apparently to the FEMA headquarters, which will be the Washington command post for such operations as conducted here. Sununu also has reached Department of Defense officials and made sure that the Pentagon is ready to put troops, if necessary, into action. Nothing much more was said here about that, Ted, but I would regard that as a sign of the seriousness with which the White House regards the potential here.
Get the sense, Britt, that folks at the White House know any more about what's going on right now than we do? I don't mean that to sound like a snotty question. It's just at times like this, sometimes it's more difficult for them to get information than it is for us.
Well, I suspect that in terms of actually seeing anything, that those pictures from the Goodyear blimp are probably the best view of it that anybody in this town has had. I do know that Governor Sununu tried to reach officials in the governor's office in California. Governor Deukmejian was not at this dinner here tonight, which was like Republican governor's dinners, apparently out of the country. I could be wrong about that, but that was the information that the White House officials here had. And he got some details which go no further, really, than the details we have reported about the extent of the damage in the San Francisco area. And, of course, obviously the White House is watching with considerable alarm to see what has happened in the area south near the center of the earthquake.
All right, Britt Hume, thank you very much. I'm going to go back now to my colleague from ABC Sports, Al Michaels. This was to be the night, Al, that you reported on the third game of the World Series. Instead, here we are doing live and continuous coverage of what looks as though it may be quite a catastrophe in the Northern California area. Just bring us, and once again, we're looking at that picture, and I understand why We keep putting it up. It's a very dramatic looking shot, but again, I don't want to leave people with the impression that San Francisco is ablaze. That is one relatively confined area of San Francisco, and there are other major incidents that have occurred, perhaps the biggest of which that we know about at the moment is that the bridge that connects Oakland and San Francisco, one portion of the upper span of that bridge has collapsed onto the lower span. But again, Al, one of the reasons we are staying on the air right now is because we do not yet have even preliminary casualty reports yet, and we'd like to give our audience some sense of how many, if any, people have been injured. Now, if you would sort of bring us up to speed, take it as you were doing a few moments ago when we talked, from where you first became aware of the fact that there was an earthquake, and then what happened during the course of the next hour or so out there at Candlestick Park.
Well, again, to reiterate, Ted, basically most of the crowd was here. They would have had 62,000 total, and I would suspect that 55 to 58,000 people were in the ballpark. It lasted, I would guess, around 30 seconds. Fortunately, there was no major jolt. It was more of a steady shake and roll. But there was a very definite sense, I'm sure, amongst people who've lived in this area and have experienced these, that a jolt was imminent, a major jolt. As I mentioned before, there was a sense of us in the mezzanine with the upper deck above us and the lower deck below us of moving backwards and, in effect, collapsing upon the lower deck. There was a strange feeling in the stadium. There was, I would guess, an ooh and an ah. Again, I didn't really have the presence of mind to necessarily be that tuned into the collective gasps of 58,000. But then, as there normally is when you're with a large gathering during an earthquake, there were wry smiles, and in fact, 5 or 6 minutes after the quake, when we had lost power and didn't have to remain in the broadcast booth, Jim Palmer and Tim McCarver and I went out onto the back of the mezzanine area at Candlestick Park, and the fans were out there saying, gee, I hope they can get the game underway, and, hey, guys, do you think the Giants can come back? So at first, you're not quite sure what had taken place, and then the reality of it, of course, begins to settle in amongst the crowd. They then evacuated the crowd. It took them a good, I would estimate, 40 minutes before the announcement was made that Candlestick should be evacuated. Strangely, very few people left the ballpark, and even more strangely, I think, very few people got out onto the field. Perhaps they were not allowed out onto the field, but I mean, if we were ever, God forbid, to have a situation like this take place again in a major American arena, they should immediately let everybody get out onto the field, which probably would have been the safest place for everybody to be at Candlestick Park. And then everybody sort of filed out when the game was postponed officially. Again, fortunately, there was no panic, there was no crowding, none of that. As far as I can tell, there have been no injuries at Candlestick Park. Again, I'm sure they will be checking for structural damage. As to what will happen to the rest of the World Series, I wouldn't have a clue at this point, Ted, because the problems in this area are far larger right now than the resumption of play in the World Series.
Al Michaels, as we've been saying periodically throughout the course of this evening, one of the reasons that we have not yet been able to bring you any casualty reports, and I am assuming that there will have been some casualties, although, as you pointed out, fortunately, there do not appear to have been any at Candlestick Park itself. As soon as we get any casualty reports, we will, of course, bring them to you. But let me explain once again what is getting in the way of collecting any of that information. The phone lines are down. There is very bad communication. One of the miracles is that you and I are still able to communicate at all, and that we're able to see you and get that picture and get some of those remarkable aerial shots from the Goodyear blimp. It looked at one point as though there was almost an emotional aftershock there at the stadium. We saw some of the players with their wives, and a couple of the wives quite literally in tears, as ball players did what everybody else does in a situation like that. You start to look for your family. You try to get everybody together again. You start counting heads. We're looking at some of that videotape now of some of the ball players with their youngsters. You want to take us through that?
Right. Well, I can see Storm Davis, the Oakland pitcher, and you're exactly right. What had happened, Ted, is that, and there, I believe, is Terry Steinbach. Yes, that is, and his wife, and Mark McGuire, and Faye Vincent is in your picture right now, the commissioner of baseball. it took a while for it to settle in before everybody really realized what had taken place. And then the wives were allowed to go down onto the playing field and join their husbands, and the children came down as well. And everybody, as I say, very orderly filed out of the park. You know, one thing about earthquakes, Ted, is that you're not sure how close to the epicenter you are. So, in fact, had we been at the epicenter of this quake tonight, not this particular quake, but let's say that there had been a small earthquake at Candlestick Park in the neighborhood of 2.8 or 3.2, there would have been there would have been no damage here, very little anyplace else. So I think that was perhaps the sense of what people had. You begin to feel you were at the epicenter, and if you were, this would have been a very, very small quake where it's centered near Candlestick Park. You have no idea, of course, where the epicenter was, and as I stated before, once I knew it was in the 6 range, you knew as a Californian that it had to be 75 to 100 miles away at least, because all of the damage is done near the epicenter, most of it.
Let me just interrupt you for one moment. Once again, we're getting that extraordinary aerial shot from the blimp of the fire in the marina area. That's not too far from the Golden Gate Bridge, which I believe those are the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge that you can see in the background there. I am told that the fire in the marina area, that fire that you're looking at, appears to be gas-fed. And the fire department in San Francisco is not putting water on the fire because that would dampen it down, obviously. That would be the good news, but the bad news would be that dampening it down would create fumes, which in turn could cause a major explosion. So what they're trying to do, what the fire department is trying to do, is to protect the surrounding buildings, but they can't put fire on they can't put water, rather, on the main fire itself until the gas leak itself is capped. Now, how they are going to do that, as you look at that fire, you can see what an extraordinary blaze it is. How they're going to cap the gas leak, I do not know. Al Michaels, you know, you were talking a moment ago about the orderly fashion in which Candlestick Park was evacuated. In point of fact, I don't know if you're aware, but at one time the police inside Candlestick Park were urging people not to leave the park, to stay there, because they said the building itself, the structure, is structurally sound, and apparently they believe it is a fairly good place to be in an earthquake. Well, go ahead, Al.
Well, I think they would have been remarkably prescient to be able to predict that and not predict and not take into effect what might have been a large aftershock or aftershocks. I think it was more a case in retrospect here, Ted, of it being a very good idea that the police did what they did, at least to avoid panic, because now that I begin to think about it, had somebody come on with a panic-stricken announcement to evacuate, you can imagine what it would be like in a stadium that would hold in excess of 55,000 people, a stadium with relatively small aisles. Again, this was a ballpark built before a lot of the modern stadiums of today, which have better egress.
Forgive me for interrupting you. I don't know if you can. We're looking at some street scenes right now. Do you have a network line in front of you? Can you see
I do.
what
In
we're
fact,
looking
I
at?
can see. I can.
All right.
Yes,
so you can see there really has been some extraordinary damage. Do you happen to recognize that area?
Well, that appears to me to either be the area we're seeing right now in those live shots from above. The houses in the area in which that fire is taking place right now are similar in style to those. Again, I can't tell you for certain that is tape there of what you are seeing or what we have been seeing live, but it appears to me to be in the neighborhood and similar to the types of homes that would be involved in the inferno that we've seen in the Marina District.
Well, indeed, you were saying a moment ago that it is a residential area. That clearly looks like a residential area, and quite frankly, the way that fire looked and the way those buildings were cracked, it would be consistent with everything we've heard. Let me just say again, because we've spent so much time looking at that fire this evening, that apparently what the fire department is doing is quite deliberately not dousing that inferno with water, because of their fear that by dousing the fire, they would create toxic fumes that would be spread all over the area, and that ironically would be even more dangerous than the fire. Al, if you would just sort of set the stage for us again, timing in terms of when this happened, how it happened, and what's happened, although it now seems almost trivial to be talking about the World Series, what in fact has happened to the series?
Well, everybody in San Francisco.
2 hours after the quake struck, thousands of commuters who reside in the East Bay Area were trapped in San Francisco as darkness fell. All forms of transport leading to the east were shut down. People were asking police whether certain streets were open, looking at roads and maps, trying to figure out a way to leave the city. One major fire was blazing in San Francisco's Marina District and another in downtown Berkeley. A huge plume of smoke was visible for kilometers over Berkeley. In downtown San Francisco, plaster fell off buildings and windows popped out of high-rise buildings. Fire engine sirens screamed. At some intersections, motorists left their cars and directed traffic. The quakes knocked out phones and power. It was felt as far away as Reno, Nevada, 360 kilometers to the northeast, as far north as the Russian River area, 113 kilometers from San Francisco, 290 kilometers southeast in Fresno, and 200 kilometers due east in Stockton. All those areas registered reports they felt the quake strongly. It was even felt in some downtown Los Angeles high-rises. At least 2 smaller aftershocks were felt within 40 minutes of the quake, and geologists just said many more could be expected. We will, of course, have more information as soon as it's made available.
It's an unusually warm night, and everyone's out on the street just talking about their experiences. This was very extreme. And it was centered a good hour south of here in the Santa Cruz area, which I can imagine what it was like down there. There are several large fires burning out of control in the Marina District, and there have been various small disasters around the city, and some people have been killed. The Bay Bridge, which is the main artery between San Francisco and Oakland, the top deck, 50-foot section collapsed onto the bottom deck and crushed some cars. And people are just out on the street because they're just kind of dazed, I think. You know, just it feels good to be near some friends when something like this happens.
Now, for many people here in Western New York, word of what happened in San Francisco tonight traveled quickly. Bonnie LaBouffe watched the story unravel on television. She tried for several hours to try and get through to her mother, her sister, and her brother, who all moved to San Francisco from South Buffalo about 3.5 years ago.
All circuits are busy now. Please try your call later. 716-4T.
But once again, it was impossible to get through on the phone. Finally, her relatives were able to get through to her from California.
Well, listen, we're all glad to hear that you're okay. And like I said, maybe you should come here for a visit. Okay, I love you. All right, take care. I'm going to try to call Dad and let him know you're okay. All right, thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
Did they ever say anything about moving out there, about being worried?
My mother used to say she would never live in California, as beautiful as it was, because of earthquakes. And there they are. And as a matter of fact, my father is in Korea, and they elected to...
Now, Eyewitness News Nightcast reporter David Collin is out at the Earthquake Center at the University of Buffalo tonight.
David, can you tell us what's happening out there right now?
Well, right now at the Earthquake Center, we have a number of people who are here. They're very busy watching a number of television reports to get as much information on this as they can. Joining me now is Dr. Ian Buckle. He is the Deputy Director here at the National Center for Earthquake Research, located at the University of Buffalo Amherst campus. And he's also an authority on bridges. In addition to that, he's from San Francisco. Dr. Buckle, could you give me your assessment of what you've seen, your impressions of this quake?
With his wife, Mark McGuire, with his wife. What is next for baseball and what will happen in the World Series? Those questions to Commissioner Fay Vincent.
Well, it'll be replayed. We have to look and see tomorrow what the circumstances are. I need to know a lot more than I know now.
Could one of the options be moving back to Oakland to finish the series if there's no damage there?
Well, we have a lot of options. There's no point discussing them because I don't know what the circumstances are.
The Golden Gate Bridge was the hardest hit in the city of San Francisco. Hundreds were made homeless when a score of 2- and 3-story frame buildings were shaken to the ground. On Divisadero Street, a fire believed caused by a ruptured natural gas line consumed at least a half a dozen homes. The mayor of San Francisco said the damage here could easily run into the hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars.
The state of California has activated 1,500 National Guardsmen, and they have 25 helicopters. They'll begin a house-to-house search at daybreak.
At this time, External Affairs in Ottawa says they have no reports of any Canadian casualties. Anyone trying to find out about family and friends in the Bay Area are asked not to try to get through to California along this.
We're in the middle of an earthquake, and not a minor one at that. Even those who had not been in earthquakes before had some intuitive sense that this was a major one. The lights were on, And people might not have noticed that right away because we hadn't even reached twilight. It was just after 5, as you said. But for those who did look up at the light standards, you saw them flick on and off for a second as the power was fading, and then eventually the lights went off. The scoreboard also flickered. It had been reading "Welcome to Game 3 of the World Series." It flickered and went off. I didn't see this next part myself, but several people told me that they saw girders in the stadium sway. Players who were in the dugouts and milling around got a sense of what to do, and they ran out toward the middle of the field, I guess feeling that that was the safest ground away from any structures. But while there was concern, and while people were definitely shaken, no one panicked, and they left the ballpark in a very orderly fashion, and in fact, not even all at once. They sort of meandered out. It is very close to a 100% certainty that there will be no World Series game anywhere tonight. It is also very likely, not certain, but very likely, that no more games will be played at Candlestick Park. Or if games are played at Candlestick Park, they'll have to cordon off a portion of the upper deck and not let anyone sit there. The other thing they'll have to assess come daybreak is whether or not there's any structural damage to the Oakland Coliseum, because it's so nearby. If both Bay Area ballparks are unplayable, they might have to go to Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, would be the nearest available ballpark.
So again, the San Francisco earthquake causing tremendous damage late last night, at least 270 people dead, and of course we will be keeping you posted throughout the day here on Breakfast Television and later on City.
In order to be freed from his car. But at the same time, most people evidently haven't survived, at least in the parts where it was most heavily crushed. As Gary Shepard said, some cars crushed to a height of only 6 inches. When this happened, when the pylons crumbled,